My mother's last words shattered me. "Your sister deserves it." In that instant, everything, our house, the money, even her jewelry, was stripped from me and handed to Jade. I replayed the scene again and again, searching for proof that love had ever been equal. But the more I searched, the more I realized I was the scapegoat, the one meant to carry the weight while Jade smiled. Then, just a month later, her message arrived. "The bills are due." My hand trembled as I typed my reply. What I sent would change everything, forever. The Whitlow house had always been the picture everyone envied. White shutters framed the windows, roses bloomed around the porch, and neighbors whispered that Colleen had built a perfect little kingdom. Inside, laughter spilled across polished hardwood floors, but if you listened closely, you could hear the crackle beneath the gloss. My mother's eyes always lingered on Jade with a softness I never earned. "She's delicate," Colleen would say, sliding a bowl of strawberries toward her youngest. "Someone has to protect her." The way she looked at me was different, sharper, like a teacher grading a disappointing paper. That afternoon, we gathered around the dining table. Jade leaned her head on Mother's shoulder, pouting about how hard life felt. Mother stroked her hair, murmuring comfort, as if Jade's occasional part-time job at the boutique was an unbearable burden. I, meanwhile, moved silently, carrying platters, refilling glasses, cleaning crumbs before they landed. My role was invisible but necessary. Without me, the table would tilt, yet no one ever said thank you. Have you ever noticed how mothers wear symbols? Mine wore a silver bracelet. It caught the light with every movement of her hand, the same hand that never reached to slip it onto my wrist. As a child, I thought maybe she was saving it for a special day, waiting for me to prove myself. But the years passed, birthdays came and went, and still the bracelet clung to her, gleaming with a promise that never arrived. We ate under the glow of a chandelier, the air sweet with roasted chicken and lemon pie. To anyone peeking through the window, we must have looked like harmony itself. Yet the framed family portrait behind Mother's chair hung tilted a single inch off balance. Guests never noticed, but I did. That crooked line gnawed at me every time I saw it, a quiet omen of something wrong in the structure no one dared fix. After dinner, as Jade flitted upstairs to change into her cozy pajamas, my phone buzzed. A message from Mother. "We need to talk about the future of the house." My pulse skipped. The words felt heavy, final, as though she had already written the ending without me. I locked the phone, forcing a smile when Jade reappeared, draped in a robe like some fragile princess. The next morning, the mask slipped further. Mother poured coffee, sliding the mug toward me without a glance. "Keira," she said in that clinical tone, "you're too sensitive. You always imagine slights where there are none. Your sister truly needs more support. Don't you see?" Her words carved me into doubt. Was I really imagining it? Had I invented the imbalance? My throat burned, but I nodded anyway. It was easier to swallow the accusation than fight a war I could never win. Later that week, while scrolling through my phone, a screenshot appeared from a cousin who hadn't realized I wasn't included. A group chat, family real talk. Dozens of messages, jokes, and plans exchanged between Mother, Jade, and relatives. My name was absent, not once mentioned, except for a line from Mother. "Keira won't understand, best to keep her out." My fingers went numb holding the phone. They had built a parallel world where I didn't exist, where my presence was a burden to shield against. One evening, while clearing old papers from the study, I overheard Mother on the phone. Her voice lowered, careful, but the words drifted through. "Yes, we may need to adjust the beneficiary. It's only fair Jade has stability." She paused, then added, "Keira doesn't need much. She manages fine." Each syllable struck me harder than any slap. I froze in the hallway, clutching the dust rag like a lifeline. Adjusting beneficiary. Those weren't just words. They were the legal prelude to erasing me completely. The following night, restless, I wandered into the den. In the drawer beneath a stack of unopened mail, I found it, an old draft of Mother's will. My eyes raced across the lines until they caught on my own name, printed neatly as a co-heir. but a thick red line slashed through it as if the paper itself had bled me out. My breath caught. I stared at the ink, the brutal certainty of being crossed away. I tucked the page back where I found it, my hands trembling. Upstairs, Jade was laughing on the phone, her voice lilting like she had already won a prize she hadn't earned. The bracelet on Mother's wrist glinted in my memory, the family portrait tilted 1 inch too far, the group chat where I was a ghost. All of it coalesced into a truth I could no longer deny. That night, lying in bed, I kept replaying her message about the house. My screen lit up with her words, glowing in the dark like a prophecy. We need to talk about the future of the house. I couldn't shake the sense that the conversation had already happened, that my part in it was silence. Sleep wouldn't come. I lay staring at the ceiling, wondering what it meant to belong to a family where love was conditional, where my existence could be penciled in, then erased with one firm stroke of red ink. And as I drifted toward restless dreams, one thought pounded in my chest. When the house's future was decided, I wasn't meant to be standing inside it. The game between my mother and Jade was subtle, like a script they had rehearsed together for years. Jade would sigh dramatically at breakfast, pushing her plate away as though life itself were too heavy to swallow. "I just don't know how I'll keep up with rent this month," she murmured, her voice trembling with well-practiced fragility. Mother leaned forward, concern etched across her face, and placed her hand over Jade's. "Don't you worry about that, darling. You've had enough struggles already. Keira will help. She always does. Divide and conquer." That was their rhythm. Jade played the helpless lamb, and Mother poured her sympathy onto her while siphoning away whatever strength I had left. My role wasn't to be comforted, but to be consumed. Family dinners with extended relatives became unbearable. Aunts and cousins, once neutral, began parroting Mother's lines. "You're so lucky you're strong, Keira. Not everyone has your resilience," one cousin said while passing the gravy, the implication heavy as stone. What they meant was clear. My resilience was permission to load me with more. With each gathering, my identity eroded, replaced by the caricature Mother painted of me, the dependable mule who could survive anything. If you were me, what would you do? Would you save screenshots, snap photos of documents, or quietly collect bank statements? I hadn't decided yet, but the urge to preserve evidence pulsed stronger every day. Something inside told me these little cuts weren't random. They were building toward something I would one day need to prove. One night, while dusting the hallway, I noticed a small key dangling from Mother's chain of spares. I had seen it before, but this time recognition struck. It matched the drawer in her office, the one always kept locked. My heart thudded, a sharp reminder that secrets often hide in plain sight, waiting for the wrong, or perhaps the right, moment to be uncovered. Days later, the weight of financial responsibility dropped on me like a guillotine. An envelope from the hospital arrived in the mail, addressed not to Mother, but to me. Inside, a bill for treatments, thousands of dollars, charged directly to my credit card without my consent. My stomach knotted. She had used my information, my trust, to bind me to her debts. When I confronted her, she waved a hand dismissively. "You can handle it, Keira. You've always been the responsible one. Be grateful you have the means." Be grateful. The words clanged in my ears like an insult. Jade, of course, had her own way of twisting the knife. That evening, she posted a story online. "Successful sisters mean never worrying about money. Thanks, Keira." Her smirk burned through the screen, a public humiliation framed as a joke. Comments from her friends piled in, laughing, congratulating her for having a supportive big sis. They had no idea I wasn't supporting her. I was being drained against my will. The next day, I sat down with my bank statements, tracing lines of numbers until a pattern emerged. Years of tuition, rent, and even travel expenses, all funneled into Jade's life, carved straight from my savings. I saw it in black and white. My mother had siphoned from my accounts to fund Jade's education, her vacations, even her designer handbags. The betrayal was written in ink, undeniable. My chest tightened as I realized the truth. I hadn't been just neglected. I had been robbed, systematically, over and over. I folded the papers carefully, hands trembling, and slipped them into a folder marked personal. Each page felt like a weapon I wasn't ready to wield, but someday would have to. Then came the announcement, casual and cruel. Mother called a family meeting with the lawyer present. She spoke with rehearsed calm, outlining her wishes. "It's only right Jade has stability," she said. "She deserves it." That word again. Deserves. My name wasn't spoken once. The lawyer nodded along, jotting notes, his pen scratching like a chisel carving me out of stone. The phrase landed like a death sentence, echoing louder with each syllable. "Your sister deserves it." I sat frozen, a smile plastered on my face for appearances, while my insides screamed. Every injustice, every betrayal, every hidden theft converged into that one moment. They were writing me out, not just from the will, but from the very story of our family. And as the lawyer closed his folder, I realized the script had been written without me. I was the scapegoat, the offering to keep Jade elevated, the sacrifice they had long prepared. But somewhere deep, beneath the humiliation and anger, a flicker remained. That key, the locked drawer in Mother's office, the proof I had begun to gather. It whispered that the story wasn't finished. When the call came, I almost didn't answer. My phone buzzed against the nightstand, dragging me out of a shallow, restless sleep. It was Jade's voice on the other end, trembling just enough to sound authentic. "Mom's gone." 2 days later, the family gathered in the attorney's office. The blinds were half drawn, casting pale stripes across the polished mahogany table. I sat at one end, Jade at the other, draped in black silk that looked more like theater than grief. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and began to read. It didn't take long. Every sentence funneled into one conclusion. The house, the accounts, the jewelry, all of it was Jade's. My name wasn't written, not even as an afterthought. The words "no contest clause" slipped into the air like a blade pressed against my throat. Not only was I erased, I was forbidden from questioning it. My chest hollowed out. For years I had clung to a child's fantasy, that somewhere beneath the cruelty, my mother loved me equally, that in the end her will might show balance, proof that she had seen me. But this document was her confession. She hadn't just overlooked me, she had written me out. I walked out of the office in silence. Rain poured down in sheets, plastering my hair against my face. At home, I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching the silver bracelet Mother had worn every day. Its cool metal dug into my palm, but it carried no warmth, no promise, only emptiness. I rocked with it pressed to my chest, the storm outside echoing the storm inside. Hours blurred into each other. Grief, humiliation, anger. They tangled until I could no longer tell them apart. I stopped eating, stopped answering calls. Nights stretched long and sleepless, shadows crawling across my ceiling. I imagined Mother's voice, still dismissive, still telling me I was too sensitive. The phrase replayed in my mind, relentless. "Your sister deserves it." At the follow-up meeting, while Jade smiled graciously at the relatives who offered her sympathy, the lawyer leaned toward her with a hushed explanation, but his voice carried just enough for me to catch 2 words: reverse mortgage. My head snapped up. The house Jade had inherited so triumphantly wasn't a prize. It was a liability, chained to hidden debt. My breath hitched, but I said nothing. I filed it away like a shard of glass in my pocket, cutting but useful. Back in my apartment, I unraveled further. Sleep abandoned me. I wandered rooms in the dark, folding and refolding laundry, scrolling through my phone without seeing. My body felt heavy, yet hollow. I thought about paying the bills, keeping the peace, giving Jade what she wanted. The temptation of surrender whispered sweetly, "Let them win, let the story end here." But the world wouldn't let me rest. A month after the funeral, my phone buzzed. A message from Jade. "The bills are due. 4 words, sharp and cold, as if she had every right to command me. My hands shook. I nearly hurled the phone across the room. Instead, I opened it again and again, staring until the letters blurred. Something in me shifted. I walked into Mother's study, the one room I had always been warned away from. My fingers brushed across the locked drawer. I pulled out the spare key I had noticed weeks earlier, slid it into the slot, and turned. The lock gave with a click. Inside, stacks of papers lay waiting, organized in neat folders. One envelope bore my name in my mother's handwriting. Heart pounding, I tore it open. At first it looked like another set of loan agreements until I saw it. Her signature at the bottom of a contract, my own bank account listed as guarantor. She had tied me to her debts without consent, without even informing me. Every hospital bill, every line of credit was shackled to my name. I sank into the chair, the weight of betrayal crushing me. My mother hadn't just disinherited me, she had weaponized me, binding my future to pay for a life I hadn't lived. I lifted my eyes from the paper and stared into the empty room, but in my mind I looked straight through the walls, through the camera lens of whoever might hear my story. If I stayed silent, I would pay these debts until I died. If I answered, if I fought back, the story could change. The morning after I uncovered the contract, I sat at my kitchen table staring at a cup of untouched coffee. The papers from Mother's drawer lay spread out before me like a battlefield. For hours I had cycled between fury and despair, but somewhere in that storm, clarity began to surface. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of a community legal aid hotline I had found online during one of my sleepless nights. A calm voice answered. I explained my situation in fragments, as if afraid the words might sound absurd once spoken aloud. To my surprise, the lawyer didn't doubt me. She asked for documents, dates, signatures, and assured me there were legal steps I could take. "You are not responsible for debts you did not authorize," she said firmly. Her certainty wrapped around me like armor I had never been given before. That evening, I joined a virtual group called Adult Scapegoat Recovery. Dozens of faces flickered across the screen, people with stories echoing my own. They spoke of mothers who favored one child, of siblings who drained them dry, of wills rewritten to exclude them. For the first time, I wasn't alone. As I listened, I realized knowledge was power. I learned about financial boundaries, the role of an executor, and the legal right to demand full accounting of an estate. The fog that had kept me doubting myself began to lift. Later that night, I sat on the floor of my living room. I closed my eyes, placed my hands on my chest, and forced my breath to slow. Inhale. Exhale. It felt foreign to offer myself gentleness, but I remembered one faint memory. Being 5 years old, running into Mother's arms after scraping my knee. For one fleeting moment, she had held me close, whispered that I was safe. I clung to that memory not as proof of her love, but as evidence that I had once been worthy of comfort. Tears slid down my face. I wasn't a cold warrior. I was a woman who had been starved of tenderness, still learning to give it to herself. The next day, as I sorted through more documents, I discovered something tucked into a digital folder on her computer, an unsent email draft. The subject line read simply, "Silver bracelet." My pulse quickened as I clicked. Inside were only a few words, typed in Mother's precise style. "Pass the bracelet to the one who proves worthy." The cursor blinked at the end, as if she had intended to say more, but never did. My stomach turned. Worthy. Always worthy or unworthy, never simply loved. I printed the draft, slid it into my growing evidence file, and began to craft a plan. Not for revenge, not for destruction, but for survival and freedom. Over the following week, I cataloged everything. Bank statements showing my funds drained for Jade's expenses. Screenshots of the family group chat that excluded me. The draft will with my name crossed out in red. The reverse mortgage documents proving the house was a gilded cage filled with debt. And finally, the contract tying me as guarantor. Each piece of paper was a shard of truth. Collected together, they became a weapon, not of violence, but of light. My plan was simple, deliberate, and entirely lawful. First, I would redirect every bill and debt inquiry to the executor of the estate, as the law required, no more allowing Jade to funnel them through me. Second, I would file a formal request for full accounting of the estate, ensuring every debt, asset, and transaction was laid bare. And third, I would send Jade a cease and desist letter warning her that continued financial harassment would result in legal action. For the first time, the path forward was not chaos. It was structure. If you were in my place, what would you write? A scathing message dripping with rage? Or something calm, precise, designed to end the game? I typed slowly, choosing each word with care. Please direct all estate-related invoices to the executor. Further contact goes through counsel. I stared at the glowing screen, the words crisp and final. My finger hovered over the send button, my heart pounding, and then I stopped. Not yet. Timing mattered. Let Jade believe I was still trapped in silence. Let her play one more hand. When I finally pressed send, it would be the strike she never saw coming. The living room was crowded that Sunday, filled with cousins, aunts, and uncles who had all gathered under the pretense of remembering my mother. In reality, they had come to see how the estate would play out. Jade sat front and center, her legs crossed neatly, pearls at her throat, radiating the confidence of someone who believed the story was already over. I stood at the edge of the room, a folder in my hands so thick it could have been a brick. When the chatter died down, I opened the folder and began laying papers on the table. These are financial records, I said, voice steady. Every dollar that left my account for Jade's tuition, her rent, her vacations. Page after page, the lines of ink formed a map of betrayal. Cousins leaned forward, whispering as I traced the trail with my finger. For years, Mother redirected my earnings to fund Jade's lifestyle, and now, the will pretends I never existed. Jade's smirk faltered. She shifted in her chair, but I pressed on. You think you inherited a house? I pulled the reverse mortgage documents from the stack and slapped them onto the table. It's mortgaged to the hilt. And these, I held up tax forms, prove unpaid property taxes stretching years back. I looked directly at her. You wanted it all. Now pay for it all. Gasps rippled across the room. Aunts clutched their pearls. One cousin muttered, "She can't mean—" But the documents spoke louder than I ever could. Jade's perfect inheritance was nothing but a gilded cage. I pulled out my phone and opened the draft message I had prepared. My thumb hovered only a moment before I pressed send. Please direct all estate-related invoices to the executor. Further contact goes through counsel. The message left my screen. A door slammed shut forever. The weight I had carried for years lifted in that instant. But Jade wasn't finished. Within an hour, she posted online a series of doctored photos showing me at parties I had never attended, standing beside strangers with captions implying theft, greed, and cruelty. She framed me as the bitter sister trying to destroy her out of jealousy. The images spread quickly among relatives, whispered about before I could even leave the gathering. For a moment, my chest burned with panic. But then I opened my folder again, pulling out verified bank statements, notarized letters, and emails directly from Mother's accounts. One by one, I sent them to the family group thread, attaching the lawyer's correspondence as confirmation. My message was simple. Here are the facts. You are welcome to verify every line with the attorney's office. The silence that followed was louder than Jade's slander. Slowly, relatives began to murmur among themselves. Some refused to meet her eyes. The golden child image that had protected her for decades cracked like porcelain. Days later, the cracks widened. The tenants living in the basement apartment of Mother's house announced they would be leaving. Plumbing had failed, repairs went ignored, and Jade hadn't paid contractors to fix anything. Without their rent, the so-called inheritance began to crumble under its own weight. She was left with bills piling higher than the roof she couldn't afford to repair. I watched from a distance, not with triumph, but with a quiet sense of justice. For once, consequences had aligned with truth. Then, just as I thought the storm might settle, an email arrived from the attorney. The subject line read, regarding the silver bracelet. My breath caught as I opened it. Inside, the lawyer wrote, "We discovered a supplemental document attached to your mother's will concerning the bracelet. It had not been opened during the initial reading. You should see this." My pulse quickened. The bracelet that had gleamed on Mother's wrist my entire life, the one symbol I thought would never be mine. Suddenly, it carried new weight, a secret I hadn't yet uncovered. The attorney's office smelled of old paper and lemon polish when I arrived to review the supplemental document. I sat across from him, heart pounding, as he slid a slim envelope across the desk. "This was attached to the will," he said. "It concerns the silver bracelet." My hands trembled as I opened it. The note was brief, written in my mother's familiar looping hand. "The bracelet does not belong to the estate. It is to be given to the child who knows how to carry the weight, but also when to set it down." My throat tightened. For once, there was no mention of deserving or earning. The words were cryptic, but clear enough. This was never Jade's. It was mine. Not because of obedience, but because of endurance and the courage to stop being used. The attorney placed the bracelet in my palm. It gleamed under the office light, heavier than I remembered. I clasped it around my wrist, and for the first time it didn't feel like a chain. It felt like vindication. Word spread quickly through the family. A few relatives reached out, hesitant but sincere. "We didn't know the full truth, Keira," an aunt admitted on the phone. "We should have asked more questions." Another cousin sent a message apologizing for echoing Mother's narrative of me as the strong one who needed nothing. Their words didn't erase the years of silence, but they cracked open a door I thought was sealed forever. That night, I stood in front of my mirror with the bracelet on my wrist. The reflection staring back at me was different from the woman who once clutched it in despair. My eyes were softer, not hardened with rage, but not naive either. I traced the silver links with my fingers and whispered to myself, "I am not invisible." The weight lifted. For the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost haunting someone else's story. Then I noticed something I hadn't before, a faint seam along the clasp, almost imperceptible. My heart quickened. With a careful press, it opened, revealing a tiny compartment inside. Folded within was a slip of paper, yellowed with age, and a small chip no bigger than a coin. I slid the chip into my recorder and pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room, thinner than I remembered, but undeniably hers. "If you ever hear this," she began, pausing as if she wasn't sure the words should exist. "I know what I did. I know the weight I left you with. I wanted to believe I was protecting Jade, but maybe I was protecting myself. If you are listening, it means you survived what I couldn't face. That means you are stronger than I ever allowed you to believe." The recording ended abruptly, leaving me stunned in silence. My chest ached, not with anger this time, but with something more complicated. Grief mixed with an odd, aching pity. My mother had never admitted these words aloud. She had let her actions damn me, but here, in secret, she confessed. It was not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but it was a fragment of truth, enough to close the wound rather than let it fester. In the days that followed, I made choices I once thought impossible. I set clear boundaries with Jade. Every message she sent went unanswered, filtered through legal counsel when necessary. There was no screaming match, no dramatic showdown, only silence, firm and final. I did not slam the door. I simply refused to open it. Low contact became no contact, and peace began to bloom in the absence of chaos. Instead, I built a new family, not bound by blood, but by kindness. Friends who had stood by me through the unraveling became siblings in spirit. People from the Scapegoat Recovery Group checked in regularly, sharing their own victories and setbacks, weaving threads of solidarity that held stronger than any false loyalty I'd known before. In their eyes, I wasn't the mule of the family, nor the forgotten daughter. I was simply Keira, and that was enough. Still, I felt compelled to do more. Quietly, I wrote my story, anonymized but true, and posted it to a support forum. The responses flooded in. Strangers wrote, "Your words are my story too." Others said, "I thought I was alone until I read this." My suffering became a lantern in the dark, guiding others who had stumbled through the same shadows. It wasn't vengeance. It was justice of another kind, the kind that spreads healing instead of hate. One evening, sitting by the window of my new apartment, I watered the small row of plants I'd begun to collect. Green leaves unfurled under my care, thriving in the quiet where once there had been only noise. The air smelled of soil and rain. I watched droplets gather at the edges of the leaves, tiny mirrors reflecting the life I was finally building. I whispered to the silence, not for Jade, not even for my mother, but for myself. She said you deserved everything, but what I deserve is freedom. And with that, I stepped out onto the balcony, bracelet glinting in the twilight, watering can in hand. My plants swayed gently in the evening breeze, roots steady, leaves open to the sky. For the first time, I understood. Survival was not enough. I was meant to grow,